Hello, everyone. This is Keith Stone with the Center for Atlantic Studies, and we're here for another installment of HeroesX Office Hours. This time it's hours 12 and 13. And our questions for these hours are, we can say that Homeric poetry, unlike Hesiodic poetry, does not directly address this question, what is justice and what is injustice? But can we say that Homeric poetry does not address this question, what is right and what is wrong? And the second one is, do you think that the ancient Greeks had the capacity to think of true happiness without thinking about the heroes that they worshipped? I especially like that one. Homeric poetry, does it address what is right and what is wrong? What do people have to say about this?
Yeah, there's one comment about the shield of Achilles. You know, the good illustration regarding the question. It states a problem, but it doesn't give the answer.
No. That's a very good observation. It really doesn't. And that's where question of moral judgment just doesn't seem to be located within the power of the narrative itself. Yeah. On the other hand, there it's a question of the price of a human life. And you could say that whether a kinsperson or a friend of yours who was killed, you could say that the question whether that person's life is worth, I don't know, 1 measure of gold or 2 measure of gold is not really a question of right or wrong. It's a question of, I don't know, equity. So I'm not sure that an arbitration necessarily involves a moral judgment. You know, there are these horrible equations in the ancient world that a woman's life is worth less than a man's life, or a free person's life is worth more than a slave's life, things like that. And we may judge that morally, but the arbitration itself is more a question of fairness than whether something is, I don't know, inherently good or bad. I'm not sure. Let's keep going. I am asking myself these same questions.
One of the participants mentioned there's a right way of appeasing gods, there's a right way of doing rituals, and there's a wrong way of doing. So there's right and wrong in that way in Homeric poetry.
Yes. Well, I used to think it was so interesting, and I think I still do, that in the body of law that is transmitted in Indic society, known as the Law Code of Manu, ritual correctness is parallel with moral correctness. So in that sense, if something is ritually incorrect, it has to be morally incorrect as well. I'm not sure that our own latter-day moral sensibilities would be very sympathetic to that, but that's certainly the case in many traditional societies now, isn't it?
Yes. One of the participants is comparing it to different versions of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Sumerian and Babylonian, for example.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And well, can I? may I share with you, I guess, my more recent concerns, which is moments of extreme cruelty in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I've seen so many commentators distance themselves from the ancient world by saying, well, in those days, justice was swift. And they're thinking of things that we will see in the Odyssey, where Odysseus and Odysseus's near and dear ones punished the suitors and those who collaborated with the suitors in horrific ways. And I started questioning in my own mind whether the medium of Homeric poetry really condones such horrific acts. But going to the Iliad, I'm thinking in particular of the human sacrifice that accompanies the funeral of Patroclus. You remember that Achilles actually sacrifices Trojan prisoners of war at the funeral pyre of Patroclus. And for that matter, the way Achilles tries to mutilate the corpse of Hector. A lot of people will just excuse that. Well, he's very angry. But look at it this way, the gods don't excuse it. I'm thinking of Iliad 24, where the Council of Gods actually determines that, oh, this is too much. Achilles has gone too far. He has reached levels of brutality that resemble the behavior of wild beasts rather than the behavior of humans. So he's not humane. Can I put it that way? And it's interesting that sometimes the master narrator of Homeric poetry actually uses expressions like medato, that is to say, he thought up an idea of how to do something, kaka erga, evil deeds. And I think many people just gloss over kaka erga, evil deeds. Well, they're bad for the victim, but without considering that maybe the master narrator himself considers something that is being done bad, that he was doing bad things. So I think that's the way I would like to handle it, at least for our discussion now, is that there, even if Homeric poetry doesn't say, oh, this was unjust, Homeric poetry can say that things that people do are bad, and maybe it's not just bad for the victim, maybe it's bad for us in our eyes as we witness what is happening.
Greg, I wonder if you could talk for a second about what you meant by the question, insofar as the difference, with regard to the difference between justice, injustice versus right, wrong. How do you see those as differing terms?
Well, it's just that decay, which is the maybe most important principle that is at work in Hesiodic poetry, in which we translate as judgment short range, but justice long range, really does have to do with whether a system of society is good or bad, in the sense that we're asking ourselves, is the system of society running in a way, operating in a way that corresponds to what the gods would approve of? How's that? and sure, it's based on the judgment of royal authority, and that's how decay must be interpreted short range. But then how things shake out in any given action, that is that long-term question, how things turn out. That's more than the result of any individual judgment by somebody who is in authority, some authoritative person. It has to do with how the cosmos operates. Can I put it that way? And there's the system for how to do it. It's called decay in a long-range sense, in an absolute sense, as when in the Works and Days, Zeus is the agent of decay and makes everything in the course of time straight, even though things start off being crooked. I would say that kind of modeling of absolute justice, we would call it, and it is called decay in Hesiodic poetry, is a kind of concern of how society happens in a kingdom. That's the poetics of Homeric and Hesiodic poetry. It's assumed that society is ideally a kingship. Of course, as Greek civilization evolves, kingship no longer becomes a model for society. As we know, this is spoiler alert, in the tragedies of Aeschylus, for example, which are the state poetry glorifying a democracy which has overthrown kingship. But certainly in Homeric and Hesiodic poetry, the way to think about society is in terms of kingship. And I go back to that kind of anthropology 101 definition of what a king is. A king is the body politic. A king is the embodiment of society. So that's the way the poetry thinks, or seems to be thinking.
What about the part, one of the comments, what about the parts played by Zeus? Is Zeus having the judgment of right or wrong?
Yeah, well, I think well, I don't just think, I'm positive that from the standpoint of ancient Greek poetics at all points, yes, he is just and he is balanced in the present, in the ritual present of the world in which we live, okay? In the world of myth, in the heroic world, that was not yet the case. And I'm thinking now of that interesting passage in Iliad 19, where Zeus is tricked by Hera, and there are all sorts of things that are happening that are just wrong and shouldn't be that way. And it's all because of this goddess called Ate, who is the personification of things going wrong, of aberration. But I only got to think of this very recently. The weird thing is that the reaction of Zeus to how Hera had tricked him and how Heracles essentially is put into a situation which is wrong, in the sense that a superior hero has to follow the orders of an inferior hero. Zeus is so angry about that that he takes this goddess who used to live with the society of the gods, or in the society of the gods. This goddess called Ate, the embodiment of things going wrong, of aberration, of wrongness. And he hurls her down from the abode of the gods to earth, so that ever since then, we're the ones who have to deal with Ate. And presumably, the gods are immune to Ate. So to put it another way, in the post-heroic world, I think Zeus is okay. His judgments are never wrong anymore. And that's because he got rid of Ate. The Ate is no longer, shall we say, infesting Olympus. And gods are immune to Ate. We're, however, not immune to Ate, and we have to deal with it all the time. So in my mind, it's now a distinction between things going wrong in the heroic age and things becoming okay in the post-heroic age. At least in Olympus, not for us, and that's why we have to keep doing ritual. That's why we have to keep reenacting myth with all of its pollutions, so that we process those pollutions and in the fullness of time, not now, but eternally recycling, we become better, we hope.
Should we turn to the other question?
Yes, I think I sort of drove that question to death.
Not what I meant, but do you think that the ancient Greeks had the capacity to think of true happiness without thinking about the heroes that they worshipped?
Yes, I think Aristotle would be ashamed of me that I asked that question, because for Aristotle, even the concept that you and I would call happiness is eudaimonia, which means having good daimones. And remember, daimon is where you're not sure what the superhuman force is that is engaged in your life, engaged with your life. So I would say, in terms of later Greek, in terms of later phases of the Greek language, where eudaimonia can be justly translated as happiness, my question is absurd. But I think that in terms of Homeric Greek, in terms of the system of thought that is encoded in Homeric ways of speaking about things, let's call it Homeric diction, I think it is possible to separate momentary feelings of happiness from the true happiness of eudaimonia as it's later understood. Why am I saying that? Because sometimes foolish people like us are happy about something that we shouldn't be happy about. I think of Agamemnon in Odyssey 8, who hears the words of Apollo's oracle and is happy about something because he was too stupid to realize that he should be sad about it. So things like that.
So Greg, you were talking about the term eudaimonia,
Yeah.
but we're also thinking in this hour about the word olbios.
Oh yeah, thank you for bringing us back to olbios, where a good example, of course, is a situation where somebody is materially fortunate and therefore happy about material fortune, and then when he or she loses that material fortune, which can happen, or for that matter, it can happen to all of us because we can't take it with us, so to speak. You can't take it with you. Then happiness about material good fortune turns out to be unjustified in the end. And what is truly obios is the kind of, okay, let's translate it now as blessedness, blessing, that that is achieved only by way of following the model of heroes and what happens to the hero when the hero dies and is then worshipped in hero cult. So I quite agree. Here again, we have situations where somebody could fool themselves into thinking that they're happy when happiness is fleeting.
Yes, and you also have to be initiated to
Yeah. Yes, if you don't have that deeper understanding, you can't achieve that deeper, lasting kind of happiness that comes from the bliss of transcendent connectivity with the world of heroes beyond death. I emphasize beyond death.
I see there aren't so many answers yet to this second discussion question.
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy, and I'm not making it easier by saying that Aristotle would be ashamed of me.
But I like that someone is talking about the metaphor of the garden, the gardener. I don't know that it helps us answer the question, but it's a powerful image.
It's a very powerful image, and I just love the fact that in Odyssey 24, when Odysseus visits his father, still unidentified as far as the father is concerned, in the garden, how the way they start to connect is that we find out that when Odysseus was a boy, he would be given lessons about that garden probably every living day of his life by the father. So in a sense, not just the father, but the son knows every detail about that garden and how the garden is maintained. And when we're thinking of a garden, we're thinking of cooperation between human and natural. I almost want to say artificial and natural. You know how we say today something is man-made, and in the sense that something happens in nature that requires the cooperation of humans. And that's what a garden is, unlike any other beautiful place where you have trees and water and all the things that you can think of in nature. But in a garden, it's all specially ordered. And that cosmic ordering, which in some traditions is the equivalent of paradise, which is heaven on earth, to say it in a neutral way, that heaven and earth, which is a garden, which is paradise-like, is a kind of expression of delight in order, which is beyond natural, supernatural. I usually don't like to say supernatural, but it kind of works in this context.
I was thinking, I mean, I just said that I don't know that the garden metaphor helps us sort out the answer to this question, but maybe it does, because it's such a, the metaphor is so connected to heroes, hero cults in our mystery.
Yes, and some of the participants out there may not know but it's a fascinating thing to know that the word paradise is an Iranian word, and it's a borrowing from Iranian languages, and the part that's para in paradisos is the equivalent of, is cognate with Greek peri, meaning around, and the desos in paradisos is the equivalent of Greek teichos, wall. So it's the paradise is a walled enclosure, which means everything outside the walled enclosure is wild, is natural. Trees grow wild, rivers flow wild, but everything that's within the walls is ordered to suit humanity, and is therefore a reflection of what's up there in the sky, so to speak. It's as if the sky, as quote unquote heaven, mapped itself onto this walled enclosure where nature, all right, I'll say it this way, is tamed and is not wild. I find it ironic, of course, that in today's world, where technology has overrun nature, what we consider a sanctuary, the equivalent of paradise, is where we keep technology out, and where we try to wall off into enclosures, what shall we call them? Wildlife sanctuaries, where nature, untamed nature, can still exist. So that's a curious flip in value systems, is it not?
We should probably wrap it up soon. Any parting thoughts? That's what I decided I would call them from now on.
As we go. As we depart from paradise.
Yes, our own weekly paradise.
Well, I think we should call on see who hasn't spoken yet. There's so many things we could have discussed with these questions. I made them so open-ended that I now feel almost guilty, but another side of me feels good about it.
Wonderful. Oh. Okay, well, let's end for now and come back next time.
Till the next time, I can hardly wait.